This week's show with Jennifer White of Lucky Jonquil is sponsored by the Embroiderers Guild of America and Avlia Folk Embroidery. Each month, EGA, the Embroiderers Guild of America at egausa.org, offers an expansive roster of creative and educational opportunities for needleworkers around the globe. This month, EGA members can register for Catherine Dugood's exciting new online class, Haystacks of Giverny. Inspired by Catherine's research into impressionistic color techniques, Haystacks of Giverny encourages embroiderers to take a non-traditional approach to embroidery and quilting, using layering techniques to create dimension, depth, light, and shadow. Registration for Haystacks of Giverny is open from February 1 through March 1, with class starting on May 3. EGA members can use the code FiberTalk5, that's FiberTalk and the number 5, to receive a $5 discount when registering for Haystacks of Giverny. Interested stitchers should also visit the EGA blog to read an interview with Catherine Dugood and learn more about her inspirations and what to expect when participating in Haystacks of Giverny. Krista West, the designer behind Avlia Folk Embroidery, continues to deliver great new designs. The popularity of her table runner designs has inspired Krista to create 3 new table runners. Cypress and Hollyhock will release March 1, Pomona's Grove in early April, and Peloponnesian Poppies in May. Also, 6 of Krista's designs are now available in kit form at Hirschner's, providing you with another way to purchase Avlia projects. Be sure to visit avliaembroidery.com to see the latest designs and enjoy free instructional videos. While you're there, put your name on the newsletter list so you don't miss any of the new things Krista will be offering in the coming months. Thanks to EGA and Avlia Folk Embroidery for sponsoring the show, and now our conversation with the creative Jennifer White of Lucky Jonquil. Welcome back. I'm Gary Parr, and you are listening to Fiber Talk, the twice-weekly podcast for needlework artists. Our artist this week from Lucky Jonquil, Jenny White. Jenny, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, some fun stuff that you have for the needleworker. Yeah, you are creative. All right, first thing I got to know is the jonquil. What Lucky Jonquil? That's a unique name, and daffodil's one thing, but to go all the way to jonquil is kind of different. What leads you down that path?
That's a great question, because out of all of the branding decisions I could have made, jonquil probably was not the best one. They always say, like, stay with something really simple. Jonquil's hard to spell. They're much less pronounced half the time. Honestly, it's been a name that I have danced around and used for, almost the last 20 years. Jonquil is the birth flower of March, and my first child was born in March. And the very first thing I ever sold online were baby carriers that I was making by hand. And I turned myself Jonquil Mom.
Oh.
And that's where the jonquil started. But then as things shifted and developed, and as I moved away from baby carriers because I hated sitting at the sewing machine, even though I loved the baby carriers, I don't mind sewing in small bits, but big wicks it drives me nuts. I don't know why. It just stuck. And so every turn that I have made as I've, gone down the years and trying to refine what it was I really wanted to do and what was going to really stick for me, jonquil has always been a part of it. So, and it is pretty unique. There's not a whole lot of jonquils out there as a business name whatsoever at all. So it kind of felt like at one point, well, if you knew me at this one stage and you come across me again, it's going to all kind of click together as to who I am.
Right.
And so that's really where it came from and how it started. It a lot like my personal username online starts with a ZZ, and everybody's all like, "Why in the world did you have a username that starts with ZZ?" And I am of the era of the first email addresses as a college student. My freshman incoming class was the first class on campus to come in as freshmen and be given an email address. We also had the honor of being the only class ever to have the student designator ZZ. The class after us, they thought, well, that was stupid of us. Let's not do that again. I have actually had people randomly every so often contact me and go, "Were you at Winthrop in this year?" And I was
No,
like, "Yes,
because of the
yes, I
ZZ.
was." Because of the ZZ, they recognize it. I'm like, yes, yes, I was there. I was one of those students. But it was at that cusp, right between computer labs and wiring and dorms and private computers and the very first Hotmail before Gmail was ever even a thing.
Yep.
And when I left school, of course, then you couldn't take your school email address with you. And I'm like, well, everybody already knows this username, so I stuck with it.
Yeah.
And since then, if I go to sign up for something, no one's ever going to take that. So
Right.
if it says the username is taken, well, chances are I need to dig out a password somewhere. But the two of them kind of converged. So when I moved past baby carriers and I did jewelry for a while, moved past that. When I got into knitting, very quickly I went right into designing patterns. Fell in with a group that was designing professionally, although not full time. And when I wanted to put out my first pattern, I was very highly encouraged to go ahead and just do it the right way. Get a tech editor, get some good photography, really serious about it. And so I kept the Jonquil name, but I tacked the Z onto it because everybody knew me one way and they just kind of dovetailed together. And that was kind of a connector. So, for knitting, I was Z Jonquil.
Oh.
Right. But then about a decade ago, that fell off because I just didn't have the support I needed at home in order to really continue with anything. And times have changed, and as the years went past, with the knitting friends, we got to a point where we would not just knit, but we might be spinning, or we might be embroidering, or cross stitching, or getting excited about a particular pattern that was coming out. And so we'd always gather up with the supplies and be out, with a girls' night. And I realized how much more I enjoyed the tools and the collecting and the rainbow of floss and the organizing of it than I actually enjoy stitching.
Yeah.
But I'm just as happy with a full box of crayons. I mean, when they're pristine and brand new, just the rainbow of colors, it just delights me. And floss is the same way. It's an endless palette, and it just sparks my happy.
Yeah.
But I really am much happier just sitting and winding a bobbin than much happier winding a bobbin than I am actually trying to count all of my little crosses and get everything all lined up just right.
That's interesting because people are of two minds with the bobbin thing. I put DMC floss on bobbins. That's how I work with them. And people, I can't stand that. Actually, I can. I'm more than happy to get a stack of bobbins and a bunch of skeins and sit there and wrap them around and put the number on, and it's put the TV on. It's just really relaxing.
Mm-hmm. That's what I have found. And the funny thing is that recently, about 2 weeks ago, I probably went back through my old Instagram and realized that it was almost 4 or 5 separate occasions across, like 6, 7, 8 years where I made a post talking about, man, I'm just so happy sitting here winding. Each time it was a complete revelation to me, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's been finally this last 2 years that I finally came to that conclusion of, I'm almost really much happier organizing the stash of floss and playing with the floss in that way than I am really getting serious about actually stitching anything. Um, but it was about that time, about 2 years ago, when a new pattern had come out and my girlfriend and I had seen it, and we were like, oh, it's been a long time since we've done something. Let's do this together. And so we were getting all the floss together, met up at a coffee shop, and we're sitting there and we're winding. And as we're winding, I'm thinking, man, I wish that I had something that would, work in a box like this and set out in this particular sort of way. How in the world could I make that? And then it just kind of kept rolling from there, where I kept thinking much more about the organization of floss, little issues because I love bobbins and I love working off of bobbins, but what I don't love is the kink that you get in the thread from the plastic bobbins, because almost all of my stash is on those DMC plastic bobbins. But down towards the end, it's just all a straight crease every so often. I was like, I wonder if there's a way to, get rid of that or lessen that. And I think having the 3 millimeter acrylic definitely makes a difference, because it's not a full fold back on itself under pressure. It's more of a wrap, so it's not going to kink as much. There's still some, but it's not as bad.
Yeah.
But in general, I think it also allows the floss to shine a little more.
Mm-hmm.
It's just something about it melts away to the background, and really what you get is just that happy little tidy color that just comes to the surface.
Yeah. Yeah, I've never had trouble with the crease. I wrap it pretty loose around the bobbins. And
I must be a tight wrapper then.
Well, I think that's.
I'm
convinced that most people, and it's the natural thing, is to wrap it tight. Because I just wrap loose, and it gets to be kind of a puffy ball there. But I've never had a crease problem, and I think that's what it is. But that's just human nature. You're wrapping thread around something, you wrap it tight, and you will get those creases. So let's back up here.
Okay, go ahead.
So the baby carriers, that was what are those over the shoulder cloth things that you made?
They were Mai Tai carriers. So this was back before they were mainstream, right about the time they were coming onto the scene. So this was. We're looking at 2005. So we're going back quite a ways now. They some of them had rings and long fabric arms that you would thread through so that you could put your kid on your back, or you could carry them on your front. But there were other ring slings where it was a loop of fabric that would go over your shoulder and create a pouch. So there are different types of slings for different types of carries, and each really had its own strong suit. It's not a one size fits all with a baby carrier.
Yeah. So is this one of those the usual deal where you made one for your child and somebody saw it, and would you make me one, and pretty soon you have a business?
It was.
Okay.
That is really pretty much how that went. And then, I refined some of the pattern that I was making, and then out of the blue, someone in Ireland found them. And it felt like my biggest customer base was in Ireland.
Of all places.
Of all places. I have no clue how that happened, and I have no idea. Um, but I do know that shipping internationally then was much easier than it is
Oh,
now.
yeah, yeah.
It was right before a whole bunch of regulations set in. Anyway, I started getting orders from Ireland. Don't know how or why. It just happened. But then I got to the point where I would get an order and I would dread sitting down and actually making it because they were all custom made. You pick out the fabric and then I would sit down and make it. It wasn't shipping out of stock or making when I felt up to making. It was order came in and I made it.
Yeah.
And I learned a lot about myself. I learned I didn't like doing that. Um,
Well, that's the
that
thing.
was,
That's the thing with those businesses that just come out of, I made one for myself and then some friends and then some friends' friends and yeah, then you have a pile of orders and you're trying to raise a kid and
mm-hmm.
you need to be at the sewing machine and people are wondering when theirs is coming and yeah, you do learn about yourself. I hate sitting in a
Yeah,
sewing machine. Yeah.
yeah. I really did. I really learned that I didn't like making things on demand. I didn't like making the same thing over and over again,
Uh-huh.
not by hand in that sort of way. Um, that I didn't like making large things.
Mm.
Um, and um, yeah, that I didn't like having a stack of orders like that. Every other endeavor since that time period has refined off of that idea
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
to get me to a point where I'm actually really happy with what I'm doing right now.
That's good. Yeah, because when you have that situation, every day, all day, you're walking around with that weight on your shoulders that I got to get dinner or I got to take the kids to school or whatever. But and then there's that weight. I really need to get back to that sewing machine, and yeah, that it
Hmm.
can just really drag you down. Yeah, I
It's
appreciate that.
stressful.
Yeah.
It's really stressful.
So I mean, you're so creative. So you get out of that and you move on to jewelry. That's a
Uh,
that's not that's not a normal stretch.
Well, as a kid, from an artist background family, and so I grew up watching my dad do woodworking and watching my dad make the artist renderings from blueprints,
Uh-huh.
and watching my dad watercolor and do pottery. I mean, it was just, if it was artistic and done with your hands, it was completely within the realm of possibility. And as a little kid, I had been given a box of seed beads and embroidery floss and had dabbled in all of that. One of my grandmothers crocheted. My mom did sewing, so I watched her sewing. So like all of these things were just a natural part of my environment.
Yeah.
Um, all of these things could come together, all of these things could be individual. Um, it was just a medium with which to be creative
Mm-hmm.
and to make something new. So for me, it wasn't necessarily a huge jump. Um, there was always some level of which I had been playing with stuff along those lines. And so the jewelry that I ended up doing for a good while was gold filled, so 14 karat gold fill findings, and usually gemstone beads. So not real super expensive ones,
Mm-hmm.
but I wasn't working with glass or with a real common pieces. It was usually a faceted gemstone. My problem with the jewelry wasn't so much that I wasn't doing well with it, but no one wanted to sell it. It was before
Uh,
online businesses were really a thing, and I went to several different consignment stores around town where I thought that my stuff would fit in very well, and all of the shop owners very wisely actually looked at it and went, "Man, I really like what you're doing, but I don't want the responsibility of the cost of your product being shoplifted."
oh.
Um, yeah. So, but actually, several of them ordered so for themselves. So I managed to sell several pieces, but couldn't get it in a store to sell it.
That's crazy.
Which was just yeah, it was a little ironic. Then at the same time, I also then had a second baby come along, and all of a sudden I've got a toddler and another newborn, and all of these little tiny beads running around, and little hands. And it was
Yeah.
just like the sewing machine. I could see a little finger getting stuck under a needle. Well, I could
Yep.
see, little fingers sticking beads where they don't belong. So,
Yep.
um, I, it just got easier to put it away for a time being. I still have lots of jewelry ideas. Lucky Jonquil, the name change that just happened, was in part driven by the fact that one of the things I would really like to start doing is getting into the craft markets around here locally. And I don't know how well the Swatch Floss drops. And, floss bobbins are going to sell at a market booth, but earrings, those certainly would. Bracelets, those certainly would. And if I can cross things into kits and make it a whole range of things where everything kind of fits together, well, then I can bring that back into play.
Creating jewelry is still in the mix then.
Still very much in the mix, but it's been one thing at a time. Because here's, I think, the critical thing I was missing all of these years was that I grew up with a fine artist, and when I went to school, I did fine arts, but what I missed out on was any design. So there was never any computer work or that sort of thing. And um, really, what it boiled down to is that was the niche I should have looked into. And no one ever articulated the differences between design and fine art or
Mm.
illustration.
I wondered that if you had an art background, so you were studying the masters and the oil painting and the illustration and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I did pottery and photography
Uh,
and figure drawing and um,
all the
painting.
classics.
I took wood shop. I'm certified on all the big tools.
There we go.
People find that strange, but yeah, I know my work, my know my way around woodworking. Um, Now the really ironic thing is though is we had an entire fiber arts department, and I remember sticking. That was the one class I never had. I remember sticking my head in the door, looking in, and going, "Man, those people are weird." And my entire adult life, that's I've circled around that, and that's all I've worked in since.
Here you are.
Here I am now. I'm looking back at it, going, "Wow, how did I miss that?"
Yeah.
Um, because yeah, once I left the jewelry, I went on to the knitting, and that was when I really learned to knit. Um, so my second child had been born, and he was a baby, and I finally really understood what I was doing with knitting needles, and it was just a whole new world opened up. Like I totally got um, where the yarn was going, what it
Uh,
was doing. It was just very orderly, very tidy, very cut and dry. So many different techniques, but there's only two stitches. You can knit and you can purl,
yeah.
and it's what you do with those that creates all of the intricacies. And um, it was in that time period where it wasn't so much even just the knit and the purl, but it- you know you have a pattern and you swap out one yarn for a different yarn, and you end up with something that looks really different.
Hmm.
A wool is not an acrylic, is not an alpaca, is not silk, is not cotton. Like these are not one for one exchanges.
Yeah.
And I got so knee deep in the nitty gritty of that, that I started teaching. And so I ended up teaching a lot of beginning crochet and quite a bit of advanced knitting. Um, but my favorite was the workshop that I taught on yarn substitution and swatching. I would wind up a ton of very different yarn. And then we would walk through talking about the fibers and their properties and why you could sub one out for another, but not this one, what it would do, why it would do it. Um, just full geekery.
Yeah, yeah.
Absolute full geekery. And I loved teaching that workshop so much because one of the things you did is you weren't even worried about knitting a project. You were just yarn tasting.
Right.
You were sitting and knitting little squares that the only purpose was to hold one in one hand and one in the other hand and compare the two of them and to see that, I knit this yarn and this yarn on the same size needles, but yet this one's flat and this one's floppy, or this one's soft, or this one's, really dense. And, and then talk about how that would affect a finished piece, like a sweater.
Right.
But there was no other purpose other than just for the fun of the little square. But you got a lot of really good information out of it. And I think that in some way ties to where I am now with the organizing of the stash,
Yeah.
like all the little swatches,
Well, that's
what you
kind
get
of,
out of it.
yeah, but that's kind of the golden whatever of anything to do with thread. I mean, that's where your top needlework designers really set themselves apart, is understanding the various threads and finishes and how they reflect light and how they work together and don't work together. And
Yeah.
you combine that with a powerful command of color, and that's where the really good designers immediately are at a new level. Is that very thing? Is they
Yeah.
it's
That'd
not
be it right there.
it's not knowing the materials. It's truly knowing the materials and how they behave together that sets them apart. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So same sort of path. I am far from that on needlework threads. I certainly do not have a masterful command on any of that.
hmm
But the idea that you could do something that would illustrate some of it,
right,
that you would be able to see it, especially with variegated and hand dyed or over dyed threads, where you get such a depth of color to know what it's going to do and how it's going to look once it's stitched up. It just looks completely different than when it's on a skein.
right, right. Oh yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, and
That's
knitting's the same way.
yeah, but
But
that's the crux of it right there. Is can you take that skein and then make it become something? Exactly. Yeah.
yeah, so yeah, I think that's where the fun of it has come for me,
Yeah.
is just watching those little things. I wish I could make them bigger, and it be cost effective. I keep thinking I need to. Uh, I at some point I want to do one of those projects where I knit a little tiny swatch of every color of the whole line.
Oh, okay.
Um,
hmm
I keep thinking maybe I'll make an acrylic piece that lines up for that sort of thing. Um, I haven't done that yet though. Those little holes actually take a long time to cut. Um,
Yeah.
it's not the most efficient thing. Um, but I really do enjoy watching how the color shifts.
So
Um,
yeah. So talk about Lucky Jonquil now.
okay.
The new brand and of the business. How did this
Yeah.
business get started? What was your original purpose, and where are you headed with it?
Ah, okay. So yeah, going back to about 2 years ago when I was sitting with my girlfriend looking at a new cross stitch project when we hadn't stitched anything together in a good long while. Um, we were getting all of our threads had just arrived and we were sorting through things and getting ready for the first club clue to drop. And I was looking at a container that she had purchased, that she had all of her project stuff in. I was like, man, I really love that. I wish it had some dividers that would, slip into place. And immediately I thought of, hard acrylic dividers that just kind of slid into one another and would allow for a divided container.
Yeah.
And I had seen that, acrylic bobbins are not a new thing. That's certainly not innovative in any way. There's quite a few out there. I was thinking about those at the same time. And it was in the process of that where thinking through all of those things and thinking, man, I don't know how I would make that. One of the guys I worked with, because I was working full time at a company on a manufacturing floor, and one of the guys I worked with said, you're really wasting yourself. You need to go work for yourself.
Oh,
And
really?
yeah, that was the gist of what he basically said. And I looked at him and just shook my head and listed off all the reasons why I could not do that, why it was never going to work. And then it wasn't very long after that, and something else happened that's escaping me right now. And I just kind of looked back at that and went, you know what? He's right. It's kind of now or never.
That's interesting.
And that,
So while you were listing those things off, was the little voice in your head saying, yeah, that's all hot air, you really need to do it?
no, it wasn't. It
Okay.
totally believed. It
Okay.
absolutely believed. I was still knee deep in a divorce that has taken about 5 years to
Ugh.
settle out custody. I had been a stay-at-home mom who was homeschooling, and then at that point in time, I was homeschooling and working full time.
Mm.
Um, I was trying to keep a roof over our heads. I needed a steady income, all of those things. So
Yeah.
no, that voice in my head was not blowing smoke by any
Okay.
stretch of the imagination.
You were in full
um,
survival mode then.
I was in full survival mode. I was actually really blessed in the pandemic to have that job. It was probably the safest place I could have been. I was working in a clean room, and the air filters through there every 2 minutes,
Oh, yes.
and the cleanest air in Charlotte. And legitimately, we were working overtime because one of the things that we produced were the camera lenses that go into the elevated body temperature cameras. And so we were working a lot.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, at that point, when he said that, I really felt like I couldn't do anything. And then we got that final stimulus check, and it wasn't that I needed desperately anything right then and there. Like my bills were covered.
Uh-huh.
But I looked at it and I was like, oh, maybe I could get a laser cutter, and then I could make those acrylic pieces. And I actually do have some ideas, but I'm going to need to learn how to use design software because I never learned how to design these type of vector graphics that you use for cut files. Um, and so I did some research and found the cheapest little laser cutter that was out there on the market. Started working to wrap my head around vector files, and figuring out what I needed to learn, and then working to teach myself all of those particular things. In my spare time after working full time and homeschooling kids and dealing with lawyers. And what I found was, man, it's a lot of work.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a lot of work. But that's really where it all started was, he said something right at the same time that my girlfriend had been like, let's get together and let's do this. And I was like, man, I really love playing with the stash. I just want to organize things now. And then having ideas and not knowing how to bring them to fruition.
Uh-huh.
And then figuring out how to do that. And that basically meant buying a laser and teaching myself a whole bunch of new stuff. And so my thought though was, okay, well, if I start doing this in order to really get anything running, in order to be able to pay for stuff, well, then I should probably carry supplies that would complement it and, have a little bit of the stitching shop too. But I don't want to necessarily carry, the stuff that everybody carries,
Right.
Maybe the stuff that's a little harder to get a hold of, the stuff
Right.
that is better quality or the upper level, because number one, this is the stuff that's hard to get a hold of. But number two, if I'm making acrylic pieces and trying to, make something a little bit nicer than what was before, like it just kind of all fit in together. And so, then it was, well, will you name it? Well, Jonquil Stitchery just certainly made sense because it's, the whole kit and caboodle.
Yeah.
But since the time that I finally figured out how to use the laser, because that turned out to be a much larger learning curve than I anticipated, and then finally got back around to learning vector design, since I put out the first couple of pieces, the Bobbin Girls and the swatch drops, I have sold more of those than I have anything in my shop.
Okay.
So the thread and the hoops and the beginners kits and the various things that are there, I think I'll keep most of the thread, and but I think a lot of it, once it sells out or goes or I consume on my own, it might be the end of that, because I was finding that I was really struggling to keep up with wholesale minimums.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
And knowing what I wanted, they all kind of came from various resources, and unfortunately, to be able to carry that, I really would need a much higher volume.
Yeah.
But then we hit last year. So fast forward, we hit last year, and then I was blindsided by having to learn accounting, which is not my strong suit. And then I moved, and then my schedule flip-flopped, and it finally hit a point where, other than to ship what sold, I had not touched the shop in 6 months. There was no extra time to devote to moving forward, to developing anything new. And looking at it late last year, it was either I do what the gentleman had told me, I work for myself, or I fold up and call it a good go and just not doable. And in the long run, with several other things at play, it made sense to jump in with 2 feet.
Uh-huh.
So as of January the 6th was my last day there at the manufacturing plant, and I started January
just this past
7th.
January?
Yes, I'm on my fourth week of working full time for me. And my first order of business was going ahead and changing up the branding, because I was thinking about multiple revenue streams. Let me get that Etsy shop back up and running, because I haven't really touched it, and looking at, doing markets and what I needed to do in order to really make it work and be able to support my kids, what I needed to have in place to even get there, because
Right.
that doesn't happen overnight. I'm certainly not paying the bills with this just yet. But yeah, so I gave my boss about a 6 weeks notice. So plenty of runway. I had a couple of panic attacks in the middle of that. He was so sad to see me go the day, I think it was the day before my last day. He was like, "Are you sure? I haven't put it into HR yet. Are you sure?"
Wow.
I'm like, yeah, I'm sure. I'm really sure. It felt really good to be so wanted and needed. It honestly gave me probably that last little bit of confidence that I needed to make the jump. But that first week, right afterwards, the first order of business was going ahead and working on branding.
I'm gonna back you up though. So
Yeah, go ahead.
when you make this decision, all right,
Yeah.
I'm gonna leave the guaranteed money every 2 weeks,
Yep.
and I'm gonna go out on my own and work for
Hmm.
myself. Was there a sense of relief, or was it I'm an idiot? What am I doing? What happens in your head?
What's the
Because
mind process there?
that's a huge leap.
It is a huge leap, and it was fully both. I was
Okay.
simultaneously absolutely terrified and gleefully excited.
Okay.
But it was full blown both. You could not separate one from the other. I certainly was not going into this blind, but I was going into this with all of those years behind me of looking at those different aspects, learning about myself, learning about selling, learning about products. Um, Even the time that I spent in on that manufacturing floor, there were so many things that I learned just about how manufacturing is run, how you price things. Working with other people, making sales goals, batching things. I just came out of all of that with this huge wealth of background. None of it honed or fully refined, but certainly enough to feel like I had a footing.
Yeah.
My family all looked at me and basically said, "Listen, Jenny, if anybody can do it, you can do it."
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even my own mom had complete faith in me. She was like, "If anybody can do it, it'd be you." Um, so I had a lot of support. I have had some people look at me like, you have lost your ever-loving mind, but especially in this economy.
Yeah.
But there have been other people that have looked at me and gone, "Yeah, you can do this. I know you can do this. You absolutely have this in you." Um, there's probably some naive blinders and probably some real guts, and it's probably the combination of the two that really got me to this point.
The stimulus check buys you the laser cutter.
Yeah. Yep.
The coworker says you need to work for yourself, so you put it all together. And
yep, put it all together.
Yeah. So then Lucky Jonquil, now the core of this is devices, tools, whatever, for organizing our needlework.
Pretty much.
Is that what? Okay.
I have plans on not keeping it just to cross stitch and embroidery thread, but I had the little pieces that come out of the center of the little rectangles that come out of the center of the swatch drops. I have a huge bucket of all of those. I plan on making a jig and going back and turning those into stitch markers for knitters and crocheters. So it's acrylic. It's not environmentally friendly per se.
Right.
It is incredibly reusable. It'll, stay really nice for a long time. But I don't want to be wasting huge chunks of it.
Right.
And that just feels really wasteful. But it looks like the perfect little thing that you would put a number 1 or a 2 or a knit 2 together, those sorts of little symbols on. And so I have plans, even earrings. I can see engraving on those for earrings too.
Mm-hmm.
I'm holding on to a lot of the scraps, and so I have plans not just for cross stitch and embroidery, but for knitting and crochet, as well as earrings and bracelets. And then maybe even some kits where you can build your own jewelry pieces, or even stitchable jewelry. A little bracelet of little swatches would be fun.
Well, what caught my eye is the swatch floss drops. So of course I ordered a bunch, but because they're just, I use floss drops particularly when I do reproduction samplers, because I'll pre-cut all my thread and put it on a ring in cardboard floss drops or whatever. and
Yeah.
put it on a ring, and then that's the ring of threads for that sampler. So it just keeps it all together for me. Like needlepoint stuff, I don't ever cut my threads because you never know how long you're going to need from one stitch to the next. But these Swatch floss drops are, I mean, they're, what are they, 1.5 inches long by 3/4 wide, something like that. But they're so innovative because you've got the hole where you can put the thread, and then you've got a slot to the side. So if I pull a strand out of a length of DMC, and then I have 5, so then I can keep that separate from the untouched threads. But then you've got this grid of holes where I can actually stitch the thread that's on that drop. I can cross stitch it or whatever. I did a cross stitch one. And then I thought, wait a minute, I'm going to do a slanted Goblin on one, and I'm going to do I don't know if I can get a road stitch to work, but you can do different stitches on the floss drop in the color of thread that's hanging below. It's just kind of a fun thing. I just sat there, I was watching football, and stitching on these little pieces of acrylic, and it was great fun. But it makes
I thoroughly enjoy it.
It makes a nice little presentation, I guess, of threads, and I thought, well, I'm putting all this time in. This is really dumb for a sampler. But I thought, wait a minute. No, it's not dumb, because how long am I going to be working on this sampler? Forever. And so now I have these threads that it just looks really neat. I just think it's a really innovative idea. And for stitchers, just a lot of fun to do. But the kind of thing, I mean, you got a space, you can write the number of the thread on there, and then everything, when you're done, can come off and get cleaned off and start again and last forever.
Yeah, that's the idea, is that it's fully reusable, will last as long as you need it to, that its surface itself is writable and erasable, as long as you got the right writing utensil. But
we should talk about that too, because I tried several pens, because you show on your website, you show writing on there, and it looks so elegant. The whole thing is just so elegant. But not every pen will write. So what pen is it that you write on there that it will stay?
It is not every pen. What you need is something that is basically like a standard Sharpie, the one that you would go and write all over your moving boxes with. They make them in a fine tip version. You can find them at most stores, but we're not talking about the new Sharpie pens that they came out with a few years ago. There's a massive difference in the ink that standard pens that we write with every day and pens like the Sharpies have. One is water-based and one is alcohol-based, and permanent markers are usually alcohol-based inks, and that's what's going to write and stay put on the acrylic pieces. If you write with something that is water-based, or a standard ink pen, or one of the standard little felt tip pens, it's gonna smudge straight off, because the water isn't going to have anywhere to soak into. It's not going to be able to deposit it just on top, nice and neat. My favorite one is a little more difficult to find, and you'd probably have to go to an art supply store or a craft store like Michael's. But Sakura, who makes the Micron pens that a lot of line artists use, also makes one called a Micro Perm, and they're sized the same way. So there's an 01 and an 05, but they're little felt tip permanent ink pens, just the same sort of ink that you would find in the typical Sharpie. It's just a much nicer tip, and those are my favorites, and that's what I use when I'm marking on them. I came across it a long time ago. They're archival ink quality, even made for photographs, for writing on photographs, and that's where I'd gotten my first one. And then once I started writing on my bobbins, that's what I was always pulling out. So now I keep one just with my stitching.
Yeah, okay. Because I tried several pens, couldn't get it, so I finally just cut pieces of artist tape and wrote on those with a pencil, and that worked. But it's not nearly as elegant as you show it with your very clear penmanship and a nice fine line. I got to get a pen. I got to have that look.
Well, I also just recently purchased a sticker cutter. So once I, run that next learning curve, the next option will be, if you can't find an ink pen that will write on it, there are stickers that will be perfectly workable.
Okay.
So
we've got
pre-printed or do it yourself, either way.
Yeah. So you have some bobbins, just conventional bobbins, and then you have kind of conventional thread drops. Those are those ones in the shape of a girl with the.
No, the girl is not a thread drop. She's another type of bobbin.
That's a bobbin. Okay.
But I do have a conventional thread drop. It's just a teardrop, raindrop shape.
Yeah.
And those are well liked. But it's just a very standard. It's just as standard as a regular, 4-centimeter acrylic bobbin. No, Bobbin Girl, the little girl shape is she's my version of a paper doll.
Okay.
She has, a hole for hanging a working thread off the top, almost as if it's a ponytail. But she comes with a little base, and so you can wrap her up in her thread and then stand her up in her little base, and then you've got a little bobbin that's just running around your desk, and just cute. She's just there to be cute and nothing more.
Okay.
But yeah, she's paper dolls. You dress her up with her prettiest floss. And I keep envisioning all of these social media reels with her, getting dressed or spinning or, changing outfits.
There you go. Yeah. Make up stories.
She really is just to be adorable. That's But I will say she also is sized perfectly to fit in the standard bobbin box that everyone uses. She doesn't fit side to side. She fits the long way.
Okay.
And you can put 4 or 5 of Bobbin Girls side by side, and so you're really not losing much working space in a bobbin box capacity. And she fits in there.
Yep.
So I made very sure to make sure that she could tuck in with all of the rest of the bobbins.
And then you took the clothespin as a bobbin idea and made that into acrylic. Tell about that. I like these things.
Well, I
like these things, meaning yes, I bought some of those too.
You were the first person to buy them. Thank you.
Was I really?
I had literally yes. I had literally come up with them the week that you purchased them.
Oh my.
I haven't worked a ton with pearl cotton, but I love it, and I love the shine that the thread has, and it's not as neatly storable to me as embroidery floss. I mean, you don't wind it on a bobbin. It usually stays in the skein, but you can't use it off of the skein the same way you can even embroidery floss. You have to do something with it, and most people I knew wound it on clothespins. So that's what I did. I started winding mine on clothespins like everyone else, which, works pretty well because, at one end you can pinch that spare end and then you've got this, whole little thing. But I had trouble when I would wind it. I would keep catching my fingers on it or, flipping it back and forth in the winding process. I'm not sure what it was. I think it was the difference of, it being slender on one end and larger on the other. It just ruined my, that peaceful rhythm of winding that I enjoy so much.
Mm-hmm.
And then you got them going all over the place, and I really didn't have a great way of storing them either, and they just took up a whole lot of room. So then I started thinking about it. I was like, well, what if I made something that was kind of like a clothespin that would be consistent all the way through, that you could write on and then it's reusable. Because of course I wrote on my clothespins, which I'm now using for all of my potato chip bags, that they all have floss numbers on them now. Um, so, 842s on the potato chips.
There we go.
But yeah, what really tipped that off was the very traditional Japanese thread spools. I don't know if you've ever seen them. They're
No.
really huge. Normally, they're not little tiny things, but they're unlike anything that we use here in North America traditionally that I've ever really seen. Um, and it's just kind of that X with large sides, and it's just wound very neatly around the center. Um, they're fantastically beautiful, just in and of themselves. And so the idea just kind of merged together to make something along those lines. And of course, I'm working with acrylic, and so it was, how can I get something that would lock together? And then stretching it out so it was more of a clothespin shape rather than a little square
Right.
or a cube. And that's really how I came up with this. And then once I started playing with it, I realized, well, if I, indent the corners a little bit in this one spot, you can then tuck it in on either end. And then you've got and just because of how it goes together, you've got a beautiful tuck for your very first piece that you start to wind with.
Mm-hmm.
And then it doesn't matter, which end your thread ends up on, you can just tie it off on wherever it is. So you're, not worried about getting back down to a different end. And that's really where that came from. I had a lady that I met online. She's up in Virginia, and she makes wooden frames for embroidery and cross stitch pieces that are in hoops. And she had this brilliant idea of making a rack that clothespin bobbins would go on, and she was organizing her own stash for this. And so she had already done a lot of the math on figuring out what hole sizes clothespins would need and that sort of thing. And so I really just sized my stuff to go straight into her little racks. And that's what most of my photographs have shown is one of her pieces, one of her special pieces that I had purchased a while back as I was
because
trading out.
that was what really caught my eye. Okay, so these are really neat.
Yeah.
Really neat bobbins for thicker thread, because pearl cotton, or I can think of several threads you might wrap around these things. But then when you showed it with them sitting in a wood holder, and I thought, oh, that's perfect when you're stitching, to have those all set up right there in front, easy to get to, and the whole package of things for me was, oh, that's beautifully done. So now so now I got to have a holder.
Well, that is her name is Kate. Her business name is Modern Hoopla.
Right.
And you should absolutely go check out her stuff. I work primarily with acrylic. She's got all of the woodworking. The piece that I have was a one-off that she made out of a piece of cherry. Most of her stuff is really thick plywood based, and it's still gorgeous. It's still absolutely innovative and really pretty. And she has a whole bunch of different holders for bobbins and clothespins. It's all that same sort of stash organization. But yeah, that, her little thread rack really got the wheels turning on that one for me. It's nice when inspiration hits from someone else's creativity.
Yeah. So that's great. Okay, so we have those things all out of this laser cutter, and I'm smelling that a bigger laser cutter is on the horizon, but
yes.
I'm just smelling that.
I can justify the cost. I've already got my eye on one. I've been doing research, and so that it's one of those as things grow. Because as I said, I just quit the day job,
Yeah.
It was just 3 weeks ago. And you found me, I think you emailed me early last week, the
Yep.
beginning of my third week. So I'd only been out of work for 2 weeks. Um, and you said, I found you on the social medias, and all I could think of is everything I've done for the last 2 weeks is working. I must be doing something right.
Uh,
Somebody found me.
yep.
So,
Well, I'm always hunting. So do we have other products in the works, or are
oh,
you still
I do.
getting your feet under you?
It's both. Everything kind of swirls together. I definitely still have more dots to connect, more things to square away. Facebook and Instagram don't want to believe that I'm a real shop yet, or I haven't gained their trustworthiness factor or something. So
Whatever.
yeah. And I finally this morning saw that Pinterest had straightened itself out. I managed to disconnect something over there. Um, and so there are still some things that I'm working on smoothing out. There's still more design work courses that I need to devote the time to be able to finally get the ideas that I can sketch out on paper really fleshed out into a graphic that is printable. But I have a notebook full of different ideas. I'm sure some of them will be flops, and I'm sure others will be um, hopefully just as well liked as the Swatch drops have been. Um, but yeah, I got a lot more ideas, and constantly thinking of new ones. I'd really one of the things I've been working on, and is still all the little pieces, prototype pieces floating around my desk. Um, when you're knitting, you end up with buying, things for winding up yarn that comes on skeins,
Hmm.
and you have a Swift. Well, I would love to make a little tiny tabletop Swift that you fit your embroidery floss over for when you're winding it. I
Mm.
don't know how you wind your embroidery floss, but a lot of times I end up slipping it over my right wrist,
Yep.
and it's a little bit off at a time. Well, my idea was a little paperweight type, because it didn't need to be big. Like that circle, when you unwind that, when you open up that little skein, it's not that big.
Right.
Um, but a little tiny mini Swift that you would use for winding your embroidery floss, which honestly I think knitters who maybe don't even use embroidery floss would still totally enjoy, because
Yeah.
it's a Swift and it's in miniature, and everything in miniature is
Yeah.
great, isn't
Isn't it? Yeah.
it?
Yep.
So,
Oh, see, I'm
but yeah,
liking
lots
I'm
of
liking that
ideas.
idea because yeah, I did what I did 21 skeins for a sampler over the weekend onto the drops, and for me, it's take it off the skein, open up the skein, and then unwind it into a pile, and then
Yeah.
I cut it into lengths, and then put it on the drop, and yeah, Swift, that would be yep, you could talk me into
Yeah.
that, sure.
Well, another nice thing would be what they call a nitty naughty. That's something they use in knitting where you wind up yarn that's off of a cone in order to skein it up.
Uh-huh.
And a nitty naughty basically measures it into particular lengths, and a little miniature nitty naughty that would pre-measure as you wind into 18-inch lengths, where you just grab it at one end and you cut through at the other end, and you have exactly the lengths that you need for your project. Um,
Make one
that sort of
quick.
thing.
Make one
Yeah,
quick. I want one.
I'm working on it. I'm working on it. I'm
Uh,
working on it. There's only so many hours in the day. I still got those 3 kids, remember?
oh yeah, that. Yeah, the kid part. Yeah, that.
But yeah, and then Uncle Sam, he wants his money, and it's that whole accounting thing, and so I'm
Right.
still working on that. I started working on taxes late last week.
Uh,
I'm hoping to have them done by midweek, but we'll see how that actually goes.
yeah, the ugly side of small business work. Yes. Hmm.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So, but yes, I have a ton more ideas, and I'm really excited. I'm really excited for the future. I'm excited for where I am right now and what I've discovered about myself, and about the ideas that just keep popping up. Um, Yeah.
Terrific.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, I'm glad to hear that you like the idea of a Nitty Naughty and a Mini Swift.
Yep. I do. Well, hey, these Swatch drops, I'm a fan. These are fun. I gotta.
Thanks.
Yeah, I sadly spent a lot of energy into figuring out what stitches I was going to put on each one just to make them all different. So,
I'd love to see a picture.
Fun in its own right. Why not?
It is.
Why not?
It is. It's its own project, and there's
Yep.
nothing wrong with considering it its own project.
That's right. So, all right, Jenny, this has really been a treat. Thanks for doing this, and best of luck with Lucky Jonquil and all your ideas. And boy, these the Swatch thread drops, I'm telling you, folks, get them. Cool. All right, thanks to everybody for listening. Thanks, Jenny.
Thank you.